Hello and welcome to episode number 38 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday, the 28th of June, 2015. I'm your host, John LeBon, and I'm usually joined in the studio by Ethan Nash of TOTT News, but he's away this week and will return next Sunday. I am, however, fortunate enough to again have with me via Google Hangout the resident wise old elder, the Silver Fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here again.
Well, for new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable which broadcasts live every Sunday from 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts, so hello to all of the people who are there already. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download from our website, free of charge at ausroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site, ausroundtable.com, so you can verify and analyze it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run to 2 hours, and I'll get to today's rundown right now. First off, we'll take a quick look at another horror flu season and the ABC airing some extremist views. Then in the domestic segment proper, we'll look at 6 topics. Number 1 will be some more Sydney siege propaganda, Australian citizenship to be suspended, who controls the banks, the housing crisis and debt bubble that's currently facing Australia, bracket creep and higher taxes, and also a quick update on a barrister who lost his fight to do with the Constitution, which makes a nice little segue into international, where we'll talk about the anniversary of the Magna Carta, some skewed reporting of fatal shootings in America, and finally, a big feature piece on white privilege. And then in the after show, we'll also be taking a look at the so-called truth movement. So we've got another packed show today, Lindsay. But first off, we like to say good day and see how things are going. So how are things up there in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, my good man?
Yeah, no, it's been pretty good. I'll get to it when we get to the flu part. But my mum went into hospital this morning because she's got a bit of bronchitis. So I've sort of been a bit stretched today, but now that she's in hospital, I can sort of relax and do the show, and I don't feel so pressed. So I'm feeling all right now. Thanks.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's just you and me today, mate, because Ethan is away. This is just the second episode in 38 that Ethan's missed, but that'll give us more time to have a back and forth discussion. So I've been looking forward to this. Lindsay, what about you?
Yeah, no, me too. Yeah, and I really enjoy getting the preparation for the show, and I don't mind doing the show. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's sort of become a major part of my life just recently. So that's about where we're at now.
Well, if Ethan is listening live, which he might be, we say hello to him, but we do have to move on to the intro lull segment, Lindsay. You've got a couple of things for us, rather. Firstly, a horror flu season.
Yes, this was in the Courier Mail on page 3 on the 26th of June. And that was the headline. It virtually speaks for itself. It said, horror flu season warning, bang, vulnerable urge to get vaccinated before peak. So I thought, my goodness me. Anyway, like I've just said, my 95-year-old mother has had the flu this week, and I've also had a bit of it, but I'm sort of back on track now. You probably hear a bit of nasally in my voice, but other than that, I feel pretty good. But it went down to her chest, and so she had to go into hospital this morning. And the point I was trying to make with this is that this is the woman who had the vaccination and has been sore in the knees and joints ever since. And what good did it do her? She's still got the damn flu. So, I'd say to anybody listening, you be the judge. Is this headline worth listening to, or do you look at something that's actually happened to other people? I get really frustrated by this constant badgering about vaccinations for every damn thing, and it becomes quite clear that, well, at least a percentage of the time, they're not worth tuppence. Anyway, enough of me whinging. I'll throw it back to you now and see what you've got to say about that.
We've spoken about this a lot, the way that the mainstream media hypes up the so-called advantages or the supposed advantages of flu vaccinations. But like you said, your mother got the flu vaccination a couple of months ago. She fell ill straight away. And here we are in the middle of flu season, and she's ill with the flu once again. Now, that's only anecdotal experience, but the more people I talk to, the more I get feedback like this. And you won't find that in the mainstream media. Instead, all you find is horror flu season coming. You better go and get your shots. And sadly, a lot of people take the mainstream media seriously, which is why we spend so much time on this show dissecting it. The second thing we wanted to look at very briefly, Lindsay, was the ABC airing extremist views.
Yes, well, this was on the 25th of June on page 48, and the headline, it was an opinion piece by somebody called Brian McNair, and the headline was "Know Thy Enemy and Bring Shadowy Evil into the Light." And I'll give a quick quote. Q&A are in trouble again, following an unscripted intervention by a certain Zaki Mallah, M-A-L-L-A-H. I get as enraged as the next person when I see an apologist for the deeply offensive beliefs of Islamic extremism being given airtime on national TV. We wouldn't welcome on to Q&A a guy with a swastika on his arm denouncing Australia for its Nazi phobia and lamenting our failure to understand that Hitler had hijacked genuine Aryanism, would we? I see very little difference ideologically between National Socialism and extreme Islam. Like it or not, he symbolizes the problem that any changes in citizenship law will be designed to address. It is important that the Australian public gets a chance to look at him in the eye. Mallah didn't say anything remotely persuasive, but at least we got a glimpse of the mindset. Know thy enemy is always good advice. So that was Mr. McNair's opinion. Now, my little comment on it, and I'll give you that, and then we'll see what you've got to say. I stopped watching Q&A after about 2 shows. This is years ago. To me, it was the ultimate lefty bullshit that I'm forced to listen to from some members of my own family. And I wouldn't voluntarily choose to subject myself to that mind torture. Anyway, that's people probably think that's very prejudiced on me or whatever, but it just bores me listening to these people go on with this rubbish all the time. I raised this article and only because of the Nazi and Hitler reference. And we've spoken of it many times, but in my mind, it pays to again point it out. I mean, it'd probably become boring for the people listening to us, but others wouldn't understand what we're saying, just how often this is being raised. I would say they refer to it at least once a week. Now, I'm not saying Hitler's, some superhero. All I'm saying is it was 70 years ago. And for those people with kids or grandkids, like Anna and Lisa's song in the Disney movie Frozen, let it go. Cry out loud, let it go. I don't know how else to get it to you. I'm sure you've got something important to say on this, but I mean, I'm having listened to the grandkids over and over with this damn let it go, and that's exactly how I feel about this Hitler business or the Nazi business. For crying out loud, let it go. Okay, I'll give it to you,
Lindsay. We've spoken about this almost every week for the last few months now. The fact that it's been 70 years since World War II was supposed to have ended, and yet every week, sure enough, there's more anti-Nazi propaganda in the mainstream media, which should make any thinking person wonder, why are they still demonizing the Hitler administration 70 years after the war? And for those who aren't aware, the ABC, which is our national broadcaster here, they have a once-a-week show called Q&A, as in question and answer. It's a panel discussion where they have 5 or 6 people, usually one politician from either of the major parties and some more talking heads. And it's basically just 1 hour of hate. It's for latte lefties mostly, and also for I guess, young liberals to watch and get angry at the other side. That's all it is. It's a complete waste of time. I don't watch it. I haven't watched it since I grew out of being a latte lefty myself all those years ago. But what happened during the last episode was that a supposed Muslim extremist or a former Muslim terrorist, or I don't know, some character got on, was one of the audience members who said something, and apparently it was a big national kerfuffle that he'd said something extremist on the national broadcaster. And sure enough, in the reportage of this Muslim supposed extremist saying something naughty on the broadcaster, they've still managed to demonize the Hitler administration 70 years later. They just can't help themselves. Now, we do have to move on to the domestic segment proper. Before we do, we've got more than 30 people watching live right now, so thank you to everyone for coming out. Silver Slave 333, Lindsay, one of our favourite loyal listeners, he's a bit upset that we haven't got the Trans-Pacific Partnership on our rundown for today. I should say that's my fault, Lindsay, not yours. Lindsay did put the TPP and the Greece issue on his agenda. I didn't get either of them into the rundown, but how's this for a plan, Lindsay? Once we get to the post-show after the 2 hours, we'll talk about the Greece issue with the EU and their monetary problems, and we'll also talk about the TPP. How's that sound?
Okay, can I just say I'm doing another article later on about a shooting in America, and I've got something in there about the TPP, which may or may not be of interest to people who've got an inkling into it. But we might be able to touch on it there.
We know what's funny about this, Lindsay, is it actually makes a nice little circle. You see, on the Q&A about 4 weeks ago, I did think, you know what, I haven't watched it for a couple of years. I might just sit down and watch what passes for political discussion on the national broadcaster. And sure enough, they had their show in Adelaide, which is where I think our trade minister, Andrew Robb, hails from, or wherever they were hosting the show. They had our trade minister on, and our trade minister is responsible for the TPP. And on the show, a 1 hour show, they didn't find time to talk about the TPP. They talked about all this other complete nonsense. So one of the people in the audience yelled out, "Why don't you talk about the TPP?" And they said, "Don't worry, we will." Got to the end of the hour and they said, "Sorry, we didn't have time to talk about the TPP." So people complained about us not talking about the TPP enough, Lindsay. I would suggest that maybe they should direct more of their ire towards the ABC, which refuses to talk about the TPP, even when they've got the trade minister on, even when they say they're going to talk about it. And remember, the ABC gets more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money every year. So I understand you want us to talk about it. We'll talk about it in the post-show today. We've talked about it in proper segments in the past, but probably best to keep perspective on this stuff, guys. We're an independent show. We talk about what we can, but we can't cover everything. The ABC's taken $1 billion of our money and they're not talking about it. If I were you, I would direct my angst towards them. But we will, I promise. We'll talk about the TPP in the after show today. We better get into the domestic segment proper, Lindsay. And the first topic is more Sydney siege propaganda. Take it away.
Yeah, okay. This was the Courier Mail again. Everything I read is from the Courier Mail. But anyway, Courier Mail, page 13, on the 23rd of June. And the headline was, "Gun Runners in Crosshairs." And a small quote, "The federal government will today launch another push to introduce mandatory 5-year jail terms for gun traffickers in the wake of the Martin Place siege." That's the end of the quote. Stimulated by the US firearm uproar over the alleged Roof slaughter, Roof, being the young fellow, I found this article of interest. I would like to do some research this coming week for presentation next week on inherent gun laws in both Britain and in the Commonwealth of Australia. It's my understanding that they are very little different to those in the US Constitution, despite our governments trying to tell us that we have no inherent right to bear arms. I'm just using this as a way, an introduction into. I think we need to go into this and have a good look at it. I mean, they're threatening us there, and we're going to do what they're not going to do to everybody. And I don't think they've got a right to do any of that. But perhaps I can talk about that next week. Have you got a comment on this article?
Yeah, I mean, basically, this was just a quick one to get us started. The Sydney siege was back in December last year, was it, Lindsay? So it's been 6 months, and we've covered it a lot on this show. In fact, I would argue we were the only outlet, independent, alternative, or mainstream that covered the Sydney siege properly. For new listeners, you can go back to episodes 11, 12, and 13, where we broke down the Sydney siege for the false flag hoax that it was. All the MP3s are available for free on AusRoundtable.com. So if you are a new listener, I strongly recommend episode 11 in particular. What's interesting, Lindsay, is that they're still using the Sydney siege weeks and months later to push whatever legislation they want to pass, which makes a nice little segue into the second topic today. And this is from The Guardian, which is an online-only outlet here in Australia. I want to read out an article almost in full from today. Let me read this one out, Lindsay. Just chuck yourself on mute there as well, because we're getting some feedback. Let me read this one out in field. It'll take me a couple of minutes. This is the second topic today. It's called Australia to Suspend People's Citizenships. Now, this is from The Guardian. Australia may suspend citizenship privileges of single passport holders, 27 June 2015. Quote, "The federal government is looking at suspending the citizenship privileges of sole Australian nationals fighting with terrorist groups, as the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, says the Islamic State group is coming after us. Abbott says there will not be any immediate tightening of security in Australia after 3 terrorist attacks overseas. The Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, says the government is considering options relating to the citizenship of 60 Australian nationals fighting in the Middle East, but declines to provide more details. We want to make sure that we can protect the Australian people as best we can, and if people have committed a criminal offence, they will face the full force of the Australian criminal law," he told reporters in Melbourne on Saturday. He would not say what rights could be suspended. Australia will block the return of dual citizens suspected of terrorism based on security advice and deport court-convicted terrorists under new national security laws. It is also looking at making the laws retrospective, meaning terrorists in jail could be deported after serving their sentence, but Dutton said he did not have an update on this from the government's Citizenship Committee. He said the committee had held an initial meeting to explore the big picture and other issues would follow. Dutton said there had been 2 terrorist attacks in Australia since September last year. 6 attacks had been thwarted, he said, and the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation was investigating 400 high-priority matters. We need to take this threat of terrorism very, very seriously, he said. The Prime Minister says it is important to remain vigilant and that everything is being done to destroy Daesh at home and abroad. This illustrates yet again that as far as the Daesh death cult is concerned, it's coming after us, Abbott said. End quote. By the way, I'm reading out the full article, so please bear with me. And I'm not making this up, and this is not a satirical article. This is 100% legitimate from a mainstream source. Let me read that bit again. Quote, this illustrates yet again that as far as the Daesh death cult is concerned, it's coming after us, Abbott said. We may not always feel that we are at war with them, but they certainly think that they are at war with us. Abbott said about half of the Australians who have gone abroad to fight with IS are sole nationals. The legislation that is before Parliament now obviously gives us a way of saying to dual nationals, you're never coming back. We need ways of dealing with those who are not dual nationals. Just as going abroad to fight with the death cult is the modern form of treason, perhaps to deal with it, we need the modern form of banishment, end quote. And again, that's from The Guardian. All articles cited during this broadcast will be linked to at our website, AusRoundtable.com. So, Lindsay, you heard that one. This is mainstream news on Sunday, the 28th of June, 2015. They're not just threatening now to take away the Australian citizenship of dual nationals, which is what they've been talking about for months, which itself is completely ridiculous. They're now even saying, you know what, even if you're only a citizen of Australia, we are reserving the right to take away your citizenship privileges. In other words, they're talking about taking away the citizenship of it. This is about as draconian as it gets. And if you'd have suggested to people even a couple of years ago that this is where we were headed, their eyes would have glazed over, they would have called you a conspiracy theorist, and they would have gone about their day doing whatever they do. But this is happening today, Lindsay. What say you?
Yeah. It is a grave worry to me. There are a couple of things here that I think exactly what you've just said. I think nobody had any idea that they would be able to get this as far as they have so quickly. And many times, particularly Ethan, discussing the laws that they brought in and how they brought them in. There was three, the initial 3, and then the later one after that, and they're just getting to the point with the metadata that it just goes on and on. That it just amazed me how slick they've been, and they seem to be able to get away with it, and it does concern me. But the second thing that concerns me is this idea of citizenship, and it has never worried me, citizenship, because if you go back to the Constitution again, we were British subjects. Now, citizenship is something that they decided to give us, and it's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know how they're going to get away with denying passports, because that becomes almost straight out of Russia. You're not allowing your people to leave the country. It's almost like, they're talking about iron curtains and things. That's almost exactly what they're talking about. If you don't agree with us, we'll stop you leaving the country. I don't know how they're going to go with that. I think you'll find that there's bound to be somebody who's going to do a High Court challenge, and then they'll have to be very careful what the High Court says, or else they'll have a revolution on their hands. You just can't go on denying people the basic rights on the basis of some trumped up thing that's happening on the other side of the world. And they'd say, oh yeah, we've got all these instances of terrorism in Australia, but we've only got their word for it. I mean, we've been over this a number of times where I think they had 600 coppers or something like that out, and what do they get? A plastic sword or something, this sort of drivel. And then they've got to keep making this, drumming it up, because the vast majority of people really aren't taking it that seriously. It is a bit of a yawn. So I think that's enough, but it is a concern to me that these people, particularly Abbott, thinks he can just get away with this sort of stuff, and it's never going to stop.
Here's the thing, Lindsay. Since last year, with all of these fake terrorist incidents, like the Newman had incident down there in southeastern Melbourne, and the 600 or 800 AFP and other police officers raiding houses last year, and all the passages of legislation to take away our civil liberties. It's already the stage, even before today, it was already the stage that they can cancel your passport. So, and without you knowing either, so that when you go to fly, you can't leave the country. They already had the right to suspend your passport without telling you, which is draconian enough. What they're now trying to prepare people for is the right to take away your citizenship. This isn't just your passport, this is your citizenship. So if you're not a citizen anymore, you don't have any rights under their laws. And here's the interesting thing. The Guardian, the title of the article is Australia may suspend citizenship privileges. What? It's a privilege to be a citizen now of the country that you're in. You know, we talk about how in George Orwell's 1984, the Ministry of Truth, the government arm, the propaganda arm, is just there to make people accept state power. A lot of people still think the mainstream media is here to report fairly on the government, as though they're two distinct things. It doesn't work like that in practice. And what we've got here is one of our mainstream outlets conditioning the masses to think that their citizenship rights are a privilege, Lindsay.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making. And that's when I was talking before about how basically we were British subjects under the Constitution. Now, then you get bound to, you know, is the Constitution valid? Because this is what gets me about these government individuals. At the one time, they're saying, oh, yes, the Constitution is valid. But at the same time, they're saying, no, we're an independent state. And then they had the court case go before the High Court over One Nation senator or something like that who was British. And then they're saying, no, you can't be a dual citizenship. You can't have allegiance to Britain. And also, you know, the whole thing is a mishmash of just absolute illogical garbage. And yet the top lawyers in the country and the top politicians are all trying to pretend that it makes sense. The only reason it makes sense is because they pick and choose what they want. And when it comes to a crunch, I think we'll get back to some reality. They cannot, doesn't matter how they try it, they cannot take away your rights as a British subject under that Constitution, under the Queen. And if they're not under the Queen, then they're not ministers. So that writes them off straight away. That we've got to start coming back to some basics and some reality. Now, the privileges part, I agree with, because what they've done is they're now trying to say, oh, yeah, the corporation registered in Washington, D.C. is now giving you privileges. And they'll pull that on us, but they're going to do that anyway. They're already threatening to do it with the vaccinations. If you don't have a vaccination, we'll pull your childcare privileges or whatever, you know, that sort of thing. So I can see the difference you're making, and I can see the point, and it's not pretty, but I think in some ways, to me, it's a good thing in that it might clean out some of this rubbish and get us back to basics, so that the ordinary man in the street will be able to see what's being done to him. Whereas at the moment, I think they're just going along with it.
Well, in the live chat, Lindsay, we've got about 50 people watching live, and Honest Trolling says that he'd be happy for them to take away his citizenship rights if they'll just leave him alone. And that's exactly the way that I feel too. If I could have nothing to do with the Australian government, that'd make me the happiest person, because right now it's pretty clear the government isn't on your side. And in the live chat, John Miller says that homegrown terror, nothing to do with ISIS, people are waking up. It is a slow process, but I am seeing more people start to question what is going on with their government right now, especially because those people, Lindsay, who are still stuck in this false paradigm of, you know, the two-party paradigm, it's the Liberals who are bad or it's the Labor who's bad, they're starting to realize, hold on, this is all getting bipartisan support. There's no difference between the two major parties. And anyone who's paying any attention knows that there's no difference between the major parties. And I am starting to see on social media and internet forums like Reddit, I am starting to see more people realize the government's not on their side. And hopefully, as bad as things are starting to get to the point where they're even threatening to take away our citizenship, to make us stateless in our own country, it's getting to a ridiculous point. But maybe it's going to take that for more people to start to wake up. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah. And the point you just made, I think, is a really good one, that people are starting to see that there's no difference between the parties. They're identical. And there was an article during the week that I rejected. You know, there's only a limit to what we can put on this show, but I'll just regurgitate it now. One of the people it was an opinion piece in one of the columns, and he was saying that how the Labor Party recruit their people. They go to universities, they join the student union, they work their way through the unions, then they start working the factional system, they work in a politician's office, then and then they get elevated to stand for an election, usually in the coalition's one seat, and they gradually work their way up through the system like that. And then he went on to say, and it's becoming increasingly obvious that that's how the Liberal Nationals are doing this very same thing. So that all these politicians we get all coming through the same format. And they've got to suck up to the people who are there. You're not getting anybody. In the old days, in the Labor Party, you had some of these blue-collar workers. I can remember one of the ministers was a shearer. You had somebody who had their feet on the ground. Whereas now, all we're getting is you're regularly telling us we're getting like almost like Stalinist or whatever. People who have been brainwashed in university who are just going into all the political positions in the country. And a lot of them, they seem to be lawyers as well. That makes it even worse. So, yeah, so more and more people are starting to realise, particularly from that show, whatever it was called, where they did a job on what it was called on the ABC. They had 2 or 3.
The killing season.
That's the one. Yeah. I didn't watch it. But from what I can gather, quite a lot of people did watch it. And that will be starting to have an effect on some of the public, because you can't get away from the fact that they're a pack of liars, and if you're a Labor diehard and you see that your own mob are a pack of liars, and you're already convinced that the other mob are a pack of liars, doesn't leave you too many bloody options left, does it? So that so I think it's good for us. I think it's good. I think there'll be more and more people starting to come on side with our point of view. So I'll give that back to you now, Johnno.
Well, Lindsay, we saw in the mid-1990s that enough people got fed up with the mass immigration that was taking place and some of the other social changes, and many of them got behind Pauline Hanson and her One Nation party. Now, I fully understand that young people today, especially those under 30 or 35, all they know about Hanson is what TV's told them, and TV's told them that she was a racist and a bad person and whatever. So to even hear me speak about her in non-negative ways will probably turn anyone who's under 30 or 35 off, unless they've read her autobiography and have realized she's not what the media made her out to be. And where I'm going with this is, so long as there's that underlying current of people who can see that something's wrong and are waiting for someone else to come along and offer them an alternative, there is hope. And I think it's only a matter of time until someone does come and offer that alternative option, whether that gets co-opted or destroyed, or that person gets put in prison as a political prisoner, as happens to Pauline Hanson, as we've discussed on the show. That waits to be seen. But clearly there's an undercurrent there of people who can see that something's wrong. And I believe, and I'm hopeful, that sooner rather than later, someone will come along and offer a solution. We do have to move on to the third topic. Before we do, though, Lindsay, in the live chat, we've got plenty of people there, and some of them, they're very, very keen for us to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what do you say? We will talk about that in the after show, but we might make that an addendum to the international segment. If we get time, we'll talk about the TPP, because clearly people want us to talk about it. So there you go, live chat. We're here for you guys. We'll talk about it. I haven't got any notes prepared, so it'll be off the cuff, but you can look forward to that. The third topic for domestic today, Lindsay, is to do with who controls the banks. Take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, before I go on, because I've had the flu, I'm a bit clogged up in the sinuses, so you can probably hear my voice. I apologise for that. It probably makes you want to give me a tissue to blow or something, but it's not going to help. So please bear with me. This one was from the Sunday Telegraph, and the headline read, "Credit Crunch on Big Banks," and it was from the 21st of June. When I put the Courier Mail headline for this story, and that was called "Banks Face a Rate Probe" into Google, I reached page 6 of the search results without finding any reference to this Courier Mail article. Google was chock full of articles of bank probes from all over the world about bank corruption, fraudulent practices, from interest rates to gold and silver price fixing, to Forex, to mortgage fraud. And my feeling about it was, do they, being Murdoch and the federal politicians, think that we are so stupid to believe any of them have any control over the banks? So what's the use of a bank probe? You haven't got any control. We know the banks destroyed Germany and Libya, and they're now after Syria and Iran. Any government who tried to restrain any bank would be immediately destroyed by Rupert and his newspapers, or by another Nugan-Hand CIA op. And that's in this country. It's just rubbish to think otherwise. And they kept flogging this stuff in the papers like we're morons. Having said that, has anyone else noticed how all our newly elected political leaders seem to have to make a pilgrimage to New York in the US for trade talks or something similar? This last week, it was Anastasia Palaszczuk's turn. She was sworn in as Premier of Queensland on the 14th of February 2015, and like her predecessors, made, quote, the trip. Now, from word of mouth reports from people I've known who knew Bjelke Petersen or he spoke to them directly, they said that he was an exception in that New York actually came to him in the middle of the night in the form of Henry Kissinger. Now, I can't vouch for it personally, but I'm, the people who told me I trust. And apparently it happened as soon as Joe floated his intention to establish a Queensland rural bank. They were all over him like a rash. So we can only imagine that when these people are summoned to New York, they're told in no uncertain manner, these are the parameters you will run your state or your country or whatever in. So it puts a complete lie to all this nonsense that the government can have a probe into the banks. Now, I can remember, this might be 20 years ago, the Liberal Party nearly lost their headquartered building because they had a mortgage, and I can't remember which bank now, but they were worried. So when you've got a bank who's got a mortgage over a political party that holds government, how on earth can you be holding a probe into the bank? I mean, that whole thing from the Bible where the borrower is the servant of the lender is true, and nothing can change that. It's just ageless wisdom. So anyway, I've let off enough steam over this, but it just irritates me when they go on and they keep speaking to us as if we're little kids. We have no concept of reality whatsoever. And I'll ask you, Johnno, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reasons why I liked this when I read your agenda this morning. Again, for listeners who aren't aware, basically the panelists, myself and Lindsay, when Ethan's here, him as well, we all put together the topics that we want to talk about. Then we go down, make a list, and we put together a rundown for the show. And when I went through Lindsay's topics of discussion this morning, I saw this one. I liked it for a couple of reasons. You've touched on the Gough Whitlam CIA aspect, which I'll get back to in a moment. And you've also touched on the monetary system. In the live chat, Greg Evans, who I think might be a new listener, says that freedom can't be attained without a full understanding of the monetary system and how financial slavery is used against us. And this is something that I've spoken about a lot, Lindsay, on this show and on Sunday sessions, the fact that usury is slavery. And it fascinates me how people who purport to be Christians don't seem to understand that their own book talks about the fact that if someone lends money and expects money back plus interest, that is usury, then that person is enslaving the other person. The Bible is pretty clear about this, and certain Christian leaders in the past have been equally clear about this. Usury is not okay, and we live in a world now that's full of usury. Why is that? Well, it's a detailed discussion. We've touched on it before. We can come back to it again later, but the point is that right now, there are people who are as good as slaves. In fact, they're the best kind of slaves because you don't need a gun to control them. You don't need chains to control them. All you need is this debt hanging over their head. And if you don't pay that debt, well, guess what? You'll be bankrupt. Now you can't get a loan. The vast majority of people now need to get loans to buy houses, whatever. So you're living within a system where they don't need to threaten you with guns or chains, although they do have that option at their disposal as well. If you don't pay back enough of the money and they get you for fraud, they don't need to use that threat, though. They know that most people are going to go to their jobs, even when they hate their jobs, to pay off the debt, to buy just a house. I mean, just to own a house now, most people have to become financial slaves for 25 to 30 years. And for what? Money is all make-believe. It's a completely fictional thing. The vast majority of money in existence in this country doesn't even exist in coins or in notes. It's entirely ones and zeros on computers. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just a basic fact. And you can get that confirmed if you go to your first class of accounting at university. That's what money is. It's just a fictional creation. But even if the coins and notes were real, they're still a fictional creation, because what do they actually, what do they demarcate? What are they? It's a fictional thing, and you're paying back interest on money that is created out of thin air. And who's taking their cut from that? Well, it's the usual suspects, and we'll talk more about them later. The other thing that I liked about this one, Lindsay, was you're dealing with Gough Whitlam. Now, for those who aren't aware, Gough Whitlam was our prime minister in this country back in the 1970s, and he was ousted in a coup. It's called the dismissal. If you study at university, they'll teach it as the Whitlam dismissal, but it was a coup. And we touched on this back on episode 4, Lindsay, of the ARP, right back at the start. The good old days, mate, the halcyon days of the ARP, because he passed away in October of last year which was right before episode 4. So I want to read out just a couple of things. I've still got my notes here from this one. I'll just read out one little bit to refresh people's memory, because this is something that all Australians should be fully aware of, the influence of other nations, in particular the United States, when it comes to how we run our affairs here. Now, Christopher Boyce, there is a former US spy named Christopher Boyce who in the 1970s was convicted and jailed for selling secret information to the Soviets. He was eventually released after 25 years. He worked in the CIA Black Vault Communications Relay Room in California, where much of the information came from Pine Gap being, of course, that intelligence installation in the middle of Australia, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of this continent. Now, Pine Gap is a satellite tracking station just outside of Alice Springs, and its operations began around 1970 when hundreds of American personnel were stationed there. And now it's home to supposedly 1,000 CIA and NSA personnel, but we can't get official figures. Not even our own parliamentarians can get official figures. It's all hush-hush. But anyway, back in 1982, 60 Minutes reporter Ray Martin conducted an interview with Christopher Boyce from his prison in Kansas. And I want to read out just a quick little part of the transcript from that episode. Ray Martin: only the Russians know exactly what secrets Christopher Boyce gave them, but the CIA calls what he did the most damaging act of espionage in decades. Boyce says that what finally turned him into a spy was America's deception of Australia. Christopher Boyce: my government was deceiving an ally, perhaps had been an ally for 2 world wars, an English-speaking parliamentary democracy. I thought it was indicative of what my country had sunk to. Ray Martin: Boyce and his espionage accomplice, Andrew Dalton Lee, sold the Russians the codes and other secret details of both the Rhyolite and Argus projects. According to Boyce, that is much more than America's partner, Australia, ever got. Christopher Boyce: when the Rhyolite project was first put in place, the executive agreement meant that all information was to be shared between the American government and the Australian government. And then along came Mr. Whitlam. When I went to work for the project, the initial security briefing that I had, I was told that, in fact, we weren't going to live up to that agreement and that we hadn't been. And that there was information that was being withheld. And also that the Argus project, which was the Advanced Rhyolite project, was to be hidden from the Australians. End quote. Now, the Rhyolite and Argus projects were centered on advanced satellites to monitor Soviet and Chinese rocket launches. I want to read out some more quotes from the interview. This is from Boyce, again, the Soviet, the spy who sold secrets to the Soviet and spent time in jail. And again, this is from an interview that was aired on mainstream media in Australia back in 1982, before I was even born. From Boyce, quote, Mr. Whitlam was not a popular figure at all within the TRW, to say the least. Mr. Whitlam was, by wanting to know what was going on there at Pine Gap, and by publicizing it, he was compromising the integrity of the project. Mr. Whitlam's government was a threat. There was a bit of a celebration that Mr. Whitlam had been canned. There was references to your Governor General by the CIA residents there at the time. They called Mr. Kerr, he being our Attorney General who sacked Kerr, they called Mr. Kerr our man Kerr. Well, my conclusion is that either the Central Intelligence directly or through intermediaries would have had to have infiltrated the hierarchy of your trade unions at some level, end quote. And here's the best part of the whole interview. Quote, to me, that was a coup. You Australians can call it whatever you want, end quote. And again, they teach it as the dismissal in our schools and our universities here, but it was a coup. This guy says it was a coup, and everything I just read out was broadcast on mainstream media. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, well, Kerr was the Governor General, so they're hoping the whole idea is that the Governor General can dismiss the government or dismiss the Prime Minister or whatever. But like you're saying, there's been all sorts of suggestions from different people that he took a bribe to do it, or, you know, there's a whole, everybody's got their own opinion on what went on. And considering that some people have approached the Queen to fulfill some of her coronation oath, and, oh no, we can't do that, I can't go against the government, an elected government, well, then how come her Governor General could dismiss an elected government? So you know, there's so many different angles to this. It was a bit almost like what I was talking about before, in that in Australia we're such a hodgepodge of ideas to do with the Constitution and a monarch and what have you, that none of it makes sense anymore. It just goes round and round in circles, and it just doesn't make any sense. So I tend to agree with you. I don't think it was a legitimate dismissal. I think there were too many. It's almost like an octopus, too many tentacles behind the scenes. It could have been in the unions. It most probably was through the CIA. I suspect it might even be Masonic control from Britain. You because the British and the Americans are, the upper echelon are pretty bloody close. You've read those books about the British and the American establishment. We really don't know, but it's obvious it's not clean. Something was going on. So that's about all I could give you on it.
Well, Lindsay, I have been accused by some small fringe quarters that our show and that our site is too focused on the mainstream news, that, the mainstream is mostly lies. So when we repeat their news or we use their news to make a point, that we're feeding into that narrative. And I understand that objection, but, a lot of our listeners, we've got more than 50 people watching live right now. A lot of them are the kind of people who've done their own research, who've gone beyond the mainstream narrative. But we target this show not just at them, but just at people in general. If I cite the Ray Martin interview, you can't say to me, oh, that's a conspiracy website, or you can't say to me, oh, that's a conspiracy interviewer. That was a mainstream segment on the 1982 episode of 60 Minutes, okay? And that's what's really interesting is we've fallen so far and our media is now so controlled that to think that Channel 9 would play an interview of a spy saying that there was a coup led by the CIA in this country, it's hard to fathom that could happen. It wouldn't happen today, but it did happen just 30 some years ago. So that's how far we've fallen. That's how controlled our media has gotten. And since most of the masses, if you want to call them that, the people who still believe in media, since most of them would never listen to an alternative site, by citing mainstream articles or mainstream interviews, we can at least give them information they can't refute, ad hominem. They have to at least accept these basic facts, and hopefully that'll get them to start thinking about things more broadly. But the other point that I make, Lindsay, is as interesting as some of the alternative information out there is, and we talk about that, on Sunday sessions and other shows, oftentimes there's enough truth in the mainstream media that if you connect the dots, you can see what's going on. But where the mainstream media gets away with this is they'll give you a little bit of truth here, a little bit of truth there, but they'll never connect the dots. And most people just can't think long-term enough. They don't connect their own dots. So you can actually tell people the truth if you want to. So long as you don't give them the full narrative, they'll never work it out. And that's why on this show, Lindsay, we try and connect those dots for people. And again, all of this information is available at AusRoundtable.com. So people can go and check the links for themselves and inform themselves. And we encourage people to do that. I don't want people to believe a single word of what I say. I prefer they go and check the sources, go and read the transcript from that interview with Boyce yourself, come to your own conclusions. And there's no doubt in my mind, Lindsay, that our government is heavily infiltrated. I mean, we've got two major parties here, the coalition, the Liberal National Coalition, and then on the faux left, the Labor Party. Of course, our trade unions are completely infiltrated. I mean, that's just common sense. You don't need a Soviet spy to tell you that, but at least you don't need a spy who sold secrets to the Soviets to tell you that. You don't need an American spy to tell you that. But when he does tell you that, that should be enough to at least get people who aren't familiar with this stuff thinking about it. And of course, our trade unions are compromised. Of course, the Liberal Party is compromised. If you still think that the politicians in Canberra, the 76 senators and 150 members of parliament, if you still think that they're there for your benefit, then you've been conned. It's as simple as that. Lindsay, I'll give you the final word on this topic, then we have to move on.
Yeah. Just following on from what you were saying, that came home to me in spades when they had the referendum. I think it was 2099 or something like that. They had the referendum to become a republic or not. And then suddenly nearly all the National Party elite or leadership all came out as Republicans, whereas prior to that they'd all been Slavish monarchists. And I thought, man, there's something's not right here. This whole paradigm of the left and the right, and no, they're all in this together. And I'll just leave that with you, because that's another one that struck me at the time that other people might not realise, if they've come into it later. But anyway, I'll leave it at that, because we've pretty much given it a fairly good run round. And if people have got anything specific, I'm sure they'll be able to follow the links, and they'll do their own research, because they'll go off at different tangents as well. And I'm always happy to listen to anything people come back to us with, because we don't know it all by any means. And it's always good to get some inside information if people have got it. So I'll give it back to you, Johnno, to see where you want to go now.
Well, you know that the fourth topic today ties in nicely with all of this, Lindsay, and it's to do with the housing crisis in this country and the debt bubble. That's topic 4 for domestic. And I should say we try not to use the mainstream sensationalistic titles like, crisis or horror or what have you. But the reality is that in this country right now, there is a housing and debt crisis. The median house price in Sydney today, our largest city, is about $800,000 is the median house price. That is, if you lined up all the houses, the ones in the middle, you're looking at $800,000. Now, if you're a young person today in Australia and you haven't worked out you've been sold down the river, well, it's time for you to start thinking for yourself, because you have been, and hopefully over the next few minutes, you'll get more of an indication why. Lindsay, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, I've got 3 articles I want to read out, and they're all from May, because we've been trying to get this out. We've had people pressing us, to deal with the economy and things like that. But it's just very difficult to fit everything in each week. So we've finally got around to this. So I'll just get straight into it. They're all from the Courier Mail. The first one's page 3 on the 26th of June. Oh, sorry, that's wrong. The first one's page 6 on the 19th of May. And the headline reads, RBA warns borrowers about too much debt. And a very small quote, the Reserve Bank of Australia is warning borrowers against taking on excessive debt as concerns grow about a potential housing bubble in Sydney and Melbourne. And that's pretty much what you've just said. The second article was the Courier Mail, page 60, which will be back in the economic part at the end of the paper, from the 30th of May. And the headline read, home is where the debt bubble is. Quote, household debt is more than Australia's gross domestic product. Mortgage rates won't stay at historic lows forever, and the property market is getting hotter. Something at this point has to give. Total household debt is running at about 1.9 trillion, or more than Australia's entire gross domestic product, of which about 1.4 trillion is mortgage debt. On average, the household debt to income ratio is 150%, higher than any other advanced nation, including the UK, France, US, and Germany, and about double the levels that prevailed 20 years ago. This comes on top of the signs. So that's the end of the quote. And my little comment was, this comes on top of the signs coming out of the US, suggesting a pullback in the stock market in September-October period. And all the talk last week in the press, on television, of Queensland sinking into a recession. So that was at the press at that time, last month. Please keep in mind that the G20 resolved to protect the banks by a bail-in of your money held in the banks and your superannuation if necessary. And while all this warning by the RBA comes out, you also have this next article which said, and that was on page 31 of the Courier Mail on the 30th of May, and the headline said, stop whining, start saving. And I'll quote, they've been dubbed the bubble wrap generation, but now the kid gloves are off, with Gen Y house hunters told to stop whinging and start saving if they want to jump on the property bandwagon. And now, having just read that, that's the end of the quote. That just reminded me of our glorious treasurer's comments a few weeks ago of along the same sort of things. Go and get a job. Start by getting a job and earning some money. And this is from the bloke who was getting $270 a week or whatever it was for as part of his parliamentary perks. Anyway, so the market bubble is about to collapse, and I think it will. It doesn't matter who you read; they talk about a long-term trend, and if it gets above it, eventually it's going to come back underneath, so that it almost always reverts back to the long-term trend. So we're way above the long-term trend. It's going to have to come back to it. Okay, so if you get in there, you bubble wrap whingers, and lose all your savings. I think that's the thing that they're trying to tell you. Get in there, get in there and lose all your savings. And to me, like I'm past this. I'm not going to be buying another house again or anything like that. But to me, they're sending out mixed messages. They're telling you there's a bubble coming. They're telling you, be careful. Interest rates are going to rise, and you're going to have a difficulty paying your repayments to the banks and what have you. But at the same time, they're calling you whingers and get in there and start buying. It really is. I find this whole thing very odd, and it's been my experience that you'll become another generation which will lose everything, and then struggle for the rest of your working life trying to pull yourselves out of the hole and then you'll just get out and you'll find that your kids will fall into the same sort of thing, because this seems to be what the bankers have been doing generation after generation after generation. There was a massive inflation in the 70s when I was about. I bought blocks of land, bought a house or what have you, and then suddenly interest rates went through the roof, and I think some of them were hit 17% or 16% or something. And then you had this same thing, where suddenly everybody felt the pinch. A lot of people had to flog their houses off, just so they could pay the debt off. It's not by accident. This stuff happens regularly because these people know what they're doing, and every generation they destroy you, so there's no wealth to pass on to your children or your grandchildren, and they're planning ahead. We are not. We are followers, and we've got to change this. Anyway, you've already spoken about free debt and things like that, and we could do it as a nation. You got your social credit and various other things. We could do it, but we haven't got the will to do it, and we're not going to get the current crop of politicians to do it because they're all owned by the banks. So it really is a worry to me. To me, it's just a ground. We've just got to start on the ground floor, talking these things, trying to get this knowledge out to as many people as possible. Our listeners know it all. We've just got to hope that they will start to feed it out to the people they know, so that it becomes a bit of a groundswell. I don't know any other way. You're not going to throw the banks.
Lindsay, I hate to interrupt you there. That's, again, I know it's easy for us to focus on the negatives and how quickly certain aspects of society are getting worse, and how conditions for certain people are getting significantly worse very quickly, whether or not they realize it. It's easy to focus on, and then the loss of civil liberties and the corruption within politics. It's easy to focus on things getting worse. At the same time, though, there is the silver lining, and I know with a lot of young people now, especially people who they went to university, they studied, they got their degree. Some of them got a job, some of them failed to get a job. But even the ones who got the job, they're now realizing, hold on a second, the only way that I'm going to be able to afford a house in this country, anywhere near the city where I work, will be to have a partner who also has a decent job. And then for the two of us to commit a large portion of our incomes for the next 25 years to servicing a mortgage. And even though many of them are too silly to realize how they're getting jibbed in this ridiculous system, more and more people are starting to realize, hold on, this isn't how it's supposed to be. There's something wrong here. There's something very wrong here. And I'm starting to detect, like I said, on the places where I keep my finger on the pulse, on social media and certain internet platforms, I'm starting to notice that more and more people, they're starting to speak out against it. And even though many of them, they're still far too conditioned, far too indoctrinated to question things like mass immigration or things like banking power and who controls the banks, even though they're still too conditioned to peer too far, they're starting to look into these things. They're starting to speak out. And as we know, oftentimes with these kinds of issues, it takes, it's just getting people to speak about it openly that's the hardest part. They've been so conditioned not to. They've been so conditioned to believe that we're heading towards a utopia and, hey, we've got all of these new social rights. Things are so lovely today, and they've been conditioned to pretend as though they think everything's okay. But once they start speaking up and they start noticing that other people are thinking like they are, all of a sudden things can go from looking bad to being a groundswell of support for real good positive change, or stopping things getting worse very quickly. And I have noticed this, Lindsay, a lot of younger people, especially the ones who've gotten their degrees and have gotten their jobs but can't afford to buy a house, they're starting to realize they've been jibbed, and it won't take too many of them to realize it, to start speaking up against it, before all of a sudden there'll be a huge platform for anyone who wants to come along and appeal to these people, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. My youngest daughter mentioned this to me maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and she's an accountant, and that was what she said to me. I come to realization that I will never be able to have my own home like you and her grandparents had. So suddenly she's realizing that her generation, a person of that, whatever you'd like to call it, earning capacity, won't be able to afford a house. And I think it come home to her. So, and I'm sure there are heaps of others. And the reason I was mentioning this article is that I've got a great worry that a lot of people have taken the plunge, and then as soon as the interest rates go up, it's going to roll them, and it's really going to be sad. It really does concern me, and I don't know any other way about it except to put political pressure on. So the more the more of us, exactly what you're saying, the more of us that are talking about it and talking some sense instead of the usual gibberish, the more it's going to build steam under the politicians. So they're going to have to do something about it to placate that huge crowd of people who are angry and unhappy with their situation. So I don't know. I'm not cynical, but I've just seen during my lifetime, I've seen a couple of generations do exactly that, buy up and then come undone. And I don't want to see it going on indefinitely. We've got to make a change. We just can't have this happening to us. And
Well,
that's what I
put it very basically, Lindsay. It seems to me like first you have to realize there's a problem, and again, because young people are so indoctrinated by school and TV now to believe that, well, now there are more rights for gay or transgender people. Can't you see we're making positive progress? You're better off now than you were in the evil 1950s and 60s. Because they're so indoctrinated into that, it's hard for them to accept in their minds, because of cognitive dissonance, that things are actually getting worse. But that's the first step. Once they get to that step, they then have to realize, well, what's the reason of the problem? What's behind the problem? That's something that we talk about on this show. We like to think. And then there's a third aspect of realizing that there's a solution to that problem. And I think right now, one of our issues is that too many people don't realize there's a problem. So they're nowhere near working out who's behind the problem. So they're nowhere near working out the solution. But the good news is that if you spend the time doing the research, deprogramming the indoctrination that you received at school, and really thinking about this, and then going through history and seeing that this has happened before, you realize this can be fixed very quickly, Lindsay. And I'll give you just one example. Putting aside all other issues to do with the Hitler administration in Germany following World War I, the reality is that that country was essentially bankrupted by World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, and the terms of their control of government following World War I. And they were in depression, and they were in a lot of trouble, that country, in many ways. All of a sudden, a new administration comes to power. They change certain policies, especially to do with monetary policy. I mean, that's what this all comes down to, monetary policy. And all of a sudden, that country, in the space of a few years, became a powerhouse to the point where it took on the rest of Europe and almost won. Now, you can say whatever you like about the Hitler administration and their other policies, and that's fine. Even if you believe everything you're told by Hollywood about Hitler, even if you believe the history that was written by the victors about it all, what you can't dispute is that that country turned around the trouble that it was in to become a powerhouse where people were happy, the workers were happy, where people loved their leader. They turned it around very quickly, because the problems, as insurmountable as they seem, they're actually being caused by a small group of the population who are parasitic and taking from the rest of us. And that's exactly what usury is. It's parasitic. It is as parasitic as humans can be, saying, I'll lend you money, but you've got to give me back that money and more. That's being parasitic on the personal level. But then on the systemic level, on the societal level, on the institutional level, if everyone needs to borrow money just to own a house, that's when it becomes truly parasitic and truly slave-like. And in the live chat, learn of the Jesuit order, whose channel I recommend people go and check it out. I'll link to it on our website, AusRoundtable.com. He says that the way we're going, it won't be long before it'll be the mum, dad, and the kids working to pay off a mortgage. And he's not far wrong. And this is one of the reasons why it disappoints me and frustrates me that young people today are almost trained to disrespect the elderly. They're trained, back in your day, gays didn't have rights and blacks didn't have rights, so you're evil, or, we can't relate to you. Well, even if you believe all of that nonsense, by not talking to the older generations, younger people today don't realize that it was only a couple of generations ago that one income was enough to pay for a mortgage. It was enough to pay for a car to put the kids through school. Yeah, they didn't have the technological advances that we have today, but they had everything they need, and that was off one income most of the time. Now we're at the point where you need two incomes just to buy a mediocre house. If you can't see that things are getting worse in the important way, in the financial way, the monetary way, the way that people now have to give up a quarter of their lives, a third of their lives, and so much of their income just to own a home, if you can't see that there's a problem, hopefully by listening to this and starting to think, you'll start to see there's a problem. You'll start to see that there's one group behind it, and then you'll start to see there is a way that we can fix it. We need to move on to the fifth topic for domestic today, Lindsay, but it ties right in with the rest of it. Bracket creep and higher taxes. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. The same thing. This is from the Courier Mail, page 17, on the 25th of June. And it says that a bracket creep to give a big lift to budget. And I'll quote, inflation pushing workers into higher brackets will provide a windfall to the federal government to help it fix the budget forecasts show. Sorry, to help it fix the budget forecast show. Bracket creep where people are pushed into higher income tax rates as wages rise with inflation, will deliver the equivalent of 1.4% of GDP to government coffers, according to the Parliamentary Budget Office. New decade-long projections published by the Independent Office reveal total tax will rise by 2.3% over GDP in the next 5 years, when a tax cap will take effect, while spending will fall 0.4% over the next 10 years. I'll make a comment and then I'll discuss something else. Again, we need to go back to the initiating legislation for the income tax and see when it was originated and what the politicians at the time stated in Parliament that the purpose for the tax was. I think this is important. Has this purpose been fulfilled? And is this bracket creep fulfilling or defeating the original purpose of income tax? And secondly, what does the Communist Manifesto say about income tax? And is this tax being used in the Commonwealth of Australia for our benefit? Or is it a payment of tribute to our conquerors at the International Monetary Fund? Now, I'm intending to research all that in depth, and even other matters if I come across them when I'm searching, and hopefully we might be able to discuss that next week. But exactly what you were just saying a minute ago, it's this inflation. Like, you buy a house and it's worth $1 million. No, it's still just a house that you can live in. It's the dollars that have gotten smaller, so you need more of them, and it's all relative. And I think people have to keep this in mind. It's the same with the wages. Yes, you might be making $100,000 a year, whereas your father or grandfather was making $10 a year. Probably $10,000 a year or less. But you can still buy bread dirt cheap. You could, like, even when I was a young bloke, you could buy a pie for 10 cents. Well, what's a pie now? $3, $4? So it gives you some idea. You're not getting anything more or less. It's just that the money is getting smaller and smaller. Somebody's taken the value out of the money, and it's not us. So I'll throw that to you, John, and see if you've got any further comments on that.
Well, yeah, we call this bracket creep. So basically, in a country like Australia, we have a progressive taxation system. So for every dollar you earn between, say, $0 and $18,000, you don't pay any tax. And then between 18 and, say, 40, then you pay 15 cents in the dollar. Then between 40 and 100, you pay 30 cents. I mean, those aren't the exact figures. I haven't got the figures in front of me. That's a basic idea that each time you move up into a new tax bracket, you pay more for the dollars that you earn in that bracket. And so what happens is that with inflation, if the prices of goods are going up a couple % every year and incomes are going up roughly that amount every year, unless you change the tax brackets every 12 months, then you're going to have what we call bracket creep. That is that people will be paying more tax simply because they're now in a higher tax bracket. It's just a natural thing, and we call it bracket creep. And because it's almost insidious, you know, people don't really notice so much that it's happening to them, especially because now your income tax is taken out of your pay before you receive the money. You know, it's taken out as pay as you go. So people don't even really notice it. They don't think about it. But we're at the point now where even just looking at income tax, the average person, say the average full-time worker in Australia, suppose their income is roughly $70,000. And again, these are rough figures that I'm using just to sort of as discussion points. Suppose the average income of a full-time worker in Australia today is $70,000. Then just based on income tax, they're working a day of every week straight for the government, straight up. Like, you know, from the time you get to work on Friday to the time you knock off, that's all going to the government. And oftentimes it's more than that. And that's just with income tax. And then you look at the other taxes that you pay, the exercises on alcohol and tobacco, the goods and service tax, stamp duty on your house, the fees that you have to pay to drive on the road. I mean, you look at all the things that people pay, and the average person is probably working closer to 2 days a week for the government. And they don't seem to realize this. They don't seem to realize that they are slaving away for the state. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't contribute to the state at all. And I guess that's almost a philosophical debate you can have another time. But the point I'm making is I don't think most people realize just how much of their work is being taken by the state. And we're talking about the same state that's now threatening to take away your citizenship in your own country. And I think if more people were aware of just how much money of theirs was being taken through income tax and other means, they might be a bit more vocal in how that money is wasted. Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, exactly. And they might really resent a treasurer who is getting all that dough to buy a house out of the government. I think that was an insult, that he should start making those sort of offhand remarks to the young people while he was on the government titty, sucking like mad. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. What else are they into, these blokes? It is so frustrating that we're being milked dry so they can live high on the hog. Now, I know there's only a handful of politicians, whatever it is, 500 or whatever it is. There's not, but it's just very annoying. The rubbish.
Well, I mean, in the live chat they're discussing, how they would structure the economy if they were in charge. And that's all very interesting. Like you said, Lindsay, this was in the Communist Manifesto, and it was also in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And as we always say, we're not here to say who wrote that book or who didn't write that book. What's important is the book was written and everything is going straight to plan. And what is the plan in the Protocols of the Learned Elders? Well, the plan is that eventually all of us, the dumb peasants, the vast majority, the masses, we will essentially have no material possessions whatsoever. We will be slaves in everything but name. And if you can't see that that's exactly where we're headed, with things as simple and straightforward as bracket creep, increasing taxes and taking away citizenship, this is all part of making you essentially just a tiny, insignificant cog in the wheel, and the wheel won't be controlled by you in any way, shape, or form, Lindsay. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Yeah, we've probably said it all. I mean, I'll try and do some research on this and find out what our politicians thought they were getting into when they first passed this income tax law, because it was only in about 1915 or something. And that was the other thing that intrigued me. It's almost exactly the same time the US brought it in as well. So this idea that it was like synchronicity, I don't think so. I think that the whole thing was worldwide. And I'd like to find out where Britain, when they started their income tax as well. I bet it was about the same time as well. So there's so much going on behind the scenes here that we don't understand. But I'll try and do a bit more research, and I'd be pleased if our listeners also did a bit of research into this as well to keep us honest.
Yeah, and that's the point we always make, Lindsay, is all we can do is put out our opinions and then give the reasons why we believe what we believe, give links to different articles or different documentaries, and recommend people go and check that out for themselves. We're not going to be right about everything. I don't think anyone is. And so I would encourage anybody not to just listen to me and believe it, but to do their own research, to do their own facts checking. And we've been doing this show now for, 7 or 8 months. This is episode 38. In the time that I've been doing this show, I've been forced to do so much research to present my opinions to the listeners. We've got 60 people listening live right now. Because I feel like I have to do so much research so I can present something that's credible, it forces me to do research that I might otherwise be too lazy to do. And if you're not doing the research, dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of research into all of these topics, you can't really expect to know enough about it to understand just how much power your enemies have. But you have to understand this. Your enemies don't like you. Your enemies do control your government. And your enemies have a plan for you, a plan that was written more than 100 years ago. So go to our website, AusRoundtable.com. We'll link to the Communist Manifesto. We'll link to the Protocols of Learned Elders of Zion. Do your own research. Find out who wrote them. Find out how it is that in 2015, we're at the point where all of the plans are coming to pass, and work out how it is that your media, your mainstream media, if they're here to help you in any way, shape, or form, you don't know anything about this. And find out why it is that if your legal and justice system are here to help you, why people like me are at threat of being prosecuted for what I say, rather than the politicians who are stealing your money and threatening to take away your citizenship. I mean, we live in messed up times, and you're not going to understand that unless you do the research, rather than fighting with other people about what your opinions are of how you would structure the economy. That's all almost academic in a sense. What you need to understand is what the enemy have planned, because guess what? Right now, they're calling the shots. Lindsay, we need to move on to the next topic. Just before we do, Greg Williams in the live chat says that until you remove the money from politicians, the incentive will be there for corruption and nothing will change. Of course, our senators get paid something like $200,000 per year. Our senators, our 76 senators, all pocket that kind of money. and they peddle all this kind of nonsense. If you go to my channel, John the Bond, you'll see I recently did a piece on the Greens Larissa Waters and the nonsense that she's been peddling lately. $200,000 a year. I wonder what would happen if some credible people got together, started their own political party, and one of their policy platforms was that the politicians get paid no more than the average income, which, like I said, right now for a full-time worker is about 70 grand in Australia, thereabouts. I wonder what would happen if a party came along and said, all of our policies are just like the others, except for one thing. We won't take a cent more than you guys get. I have a funny feeling that they'd be pretty popular. If you agree, leave a comment underneath this video on YouTube or on our website, AusRoundtable.com. We'd love to get your feedback. I think a lot of people would support that, Lindsay. We need to move on to the sixth and final topic. Just a quick update on the barrister who lost his fight about speeding tickets.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was either 27 or 28, number 27 or 28 podcast. We spoke about this barrister. He's a top barrister, Tony Morris. This article now comes from the Courier Mail, page 19 on the 24th of June. And it says, barrister loses fight on speed camera fine law. And in the earlier podcast, it basically said he was going to take them on. You know, he was going to be a bit of a hero for the average bloke who gets pulled over with a speeding camera, because the law as it stands, my understanding of it is that if a car is clocked speeding by a speeding camera and they can't identify the driver, the owner of the vehicle will be fined anyway, whether he was driving or not. And this man, it didn't say exactly, but I suspect the way it was phrased was that his wife might have been driving it, or somebody he knew else was driving it, and so he was going to take them on. But as it turns out, he lost the case. And I'll read the quote. Top barrister Tony Morris has lost his challenge in Queensland speed camera fines. The Court of Appeal ruled the law, which allows car owners to be fined even if they are not driving, was not inconsistent with the Constitution. Now, I don't know how they arrived at that, but obviously they have. And I'm not sure which constitution, whether that was the state constitution or the federal constitution. I didn't look into it enough. I think at the time I mentioned that it was almost like, for a barrister, he was mixing his jurisdictions. He was going on about things that sounded like almost like common law to me, and yet he was dealing in, I don't know what this, I'm not quite sure. Some people tell me it's
well, basically, Lindsay, while you regather your thoughts there, this was just a quick update because a few episodes ago we were talking about how a politician was challenging a speeding fine. His claim was, well, you can't issue me the fine. I wasn't driving at the time. It's against the Constitution, and it seems as though he's lost his case.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I was going to say it was Admiralty law. So we've got people telling us they're working in Admiralty, and anyway, there's so many different opinions on this, but basically he's going in and saying, yeah, you can't do this to me because I'm a human being or what have you. Well, that's not the court. And I would have thought that he'd know that. So I was sus at the time that this might have been a put up job, to fill a hole that they were worried about, or maybe not. Maybe he did have the right intentions, and he just doesn't know really what's going on behind the scenes. It's sort of hard for me to understand what went wrong there. But anyway, the only reason I brought this in was just in case somebody else had been following us when we were talking about it back then, and now here's the answer to what we were talking about. He's been knocked out. So that was pretty much all I had to say about it.
Yeah, well, we like to keep people updated on the topics that we discuss, so thank you for bringing that one to our attention. It does tie into the first topic of international, Lindsay, which is to do with the anniversary of the Magna Carta. Now, we did mean to speak about this a couple of weeks ago when it was the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. Obviously, other topics came up and we had to push it back a week or two, but this week we will talk about it. The Magna Carta, take it away.
Okay, thanks for that. This one I had from the Telegraph UK website, which said, Magna Carta anniversary. Now, finally, we marked the spot where freedom was born. And that was on the 12th of June. And the quote was that exactly 800 years ago, on a reedy stretch of riverbank outside Windsor, the most important bargain in the history of the human race was struck. It's a big claim, but there are occasions when only superlatives will do. As Lord Denning put it, Magna Carta was the greatest constitutional document of all time, the foundation of the freedom of the individual against the arbitrary authority of the despot. End of quote. For the first time anywhere, the rules were elevated above the ruler. Yet until now, there has been no British memorial to mark the spot. Those riparian meadows look pretty much as they did when King John stomped his irritable way across them in 1215. Green, flush, and rank with June. June, as in June. Okay, so that's the end of the quote. My comment was that the 15th of June is the 800th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta. It's still a part of Queensland law, being recognised in the coronation oath of the Queen of the Constitution, not the Queen of Australia, and also in the Imperial Acts Application Act. And I think you'll find that there's an Imperial Acts Application Act in other states as well. Unfortunately, though, the lawyers pontificate about it and its effects today. They still ignore trial by jury for other than cases they decide warranted. That is probably because the Charter was for free men and not serfs. Is that telling us something about the status we are considered to have today? We often talk here about being economic slaves. We just may be slaves in fact and in law as well. I would like our listeners to do a search for the clauses 10 and 11 of the Magna Carta relating to Jews, because in previous shows, listeners have asked, just when did the Jewish adverse influence upon our society begin? Now, I think you'll find if you read those clauses 10 and 11, you'll find that it went right back to 1215 and beyond, because that was, and I won't preempt it, because otherwise it's going to make people lazy. It's not difficult to get on Google and just bring those clauses up and see exactly what they said back in 1215 about the influence of the Jews. Anyway, having said all that, that'll do me, and I'll just see what you've got to say about that, Johnno, and then we can have a bit of a discussion about it.
Yeah, I mean, the Magna Carta, I would put to you, Lindsay, that most people who go through the 13 years of state-based so-called education, what I call indoctrination, most of them who go through the full 13 years, if you were to ask them about the Magna Carta, I'd say most of them would have a basic idea of what it was. It was this document that was written hundreds of years ago, and it gave us our rights. And that'd be about as much knowledge as they have. And I guess this goes to a deeper issue of people simply don't understand the law. And I don't mean basic laws like you can drink here, or if you do this, you might get this amount of a fine. I mean fundamental law, where it comes from. And I put my hand up here and say, even I don't understand anywhere near enough about laws at the fundamental level. In the live chat, we've got more than 60 people watching right now, and there's an interesting debate going on between common law man, one of our regular listeners, and a couple others, talking about what the law really is and how it applies to us. And with the Magna Carta, you mentioned the Jewish aspect. I'll have more to say on that in a moment, but I guess the reason why I wanted us to bring up the Magna Carta today is it's been 800 years since that document was written or formalized, and here we are, and the average person today not only doesn't know the law, but seems to get screwed over by it at every turn. And how many people can say with a straight face that they feel as though the legal system has helped them on a personal level? I would say not many. Lindsay, what say you?
Oh yeah, I agree entirely. We've been shanghaied into, well, just exactly what I was trying to allude to before with this barrister. You go into a court and it's for fiction. It's not for men and women. And if you try and bring up common law in the courts, they'll throw you out in your ear. Or you bring up the Constitution, they'll throw you out in your ear. No, it's for fictions. And the best way I can describe it, it's like playing Monopoly. When you play Monopoly, you have this little token that might be an iron or a car or something like that, and you each get one of those and you play. Now, if somebody steps up and says, I want to step on the board myself, it completely buggers the game. It breaks everything up. And it's almost like that in the court. You go into court and it's about fictions. And if a man comes in there, he's going to bugger up the whole game. That's why they toss you out on your ear. And I've seen it time and time again with people going in there. We've really been screwed over badly, and they keep saying, "Oh, but you did it by your admission, or you did it by your agreement." And I don't know that that's strictly true. I think we were conned and lied to and defrauded, and I think there's a big change coming soon. We're going to have to get on top of this and sort it out, because, well, we just finished discussing the economic results of this. I mean, how many people have have had this business with a bank where you've got a mortgage and the bank has securitized it and sold it, and you try and take the banks on, and the courts won't. Like I was reading one the other day about South Africa, where a fella in South Africa went to the trouble, cost him a lot of money to get somebody in America to follow down the deed for his mortgage where it had been separated from the mortgage, so that the promissory note had been separated and been traded, securitized and traded. And he paid this company in America to follow it through, and it finished up in Taiwan or somewhere like that in a bank. When he tried to bring that before the court, they don't want to know about it. No, we don't accept that that's legitimate evidence in this court. So you start to wonder, we really are being screwed over. Even we've got no way of coming back and getting justice against this banking system, and we're going to have to change it. We can't go on the way we're going, or we'll finish up completely destroyed. And I'm ranting again. I'll shut up. But
in the live chat, we've been joined by another new listener. By the looks of things, Kerry Verdon says, "What can we do to save ourselves and upcoming generations?" I guess we can expand upon this more in the after show, because we try to keep to the original agenda for the show. But speaking, I guess, in basic terms, I put it to you, Kerry, and I put it to all of our listeners and anyone who ever does listen to this show, that if we do have a government that's our enemy or controlled by our enemy, then they will have used their schools and their TV to condition you to not even consider and to even get upset emotionally at whatever the solution might be. That is, they will rig the game. They'll make sure that your mind is being conditioned so that whatever solution that there might be to their tyrannical control, you won't even want to consider. In fact, if they can, they'll try and implant seeds in your mind. So anyone who does offer the real solution, you'll instantly get angry and have an emotional response so that you won't consider the solution. Think about it logically. If you were the people in charge and you were controlling the populace as your slaves, as your occupied territory assets, then what would you do if you control the school and the media? Well, you would use the school and the media to condition people to think that any real solution, any of the good solutions that are offered, are somehow bad for them, or to make them have an emotional response should anyone offer a solution that's been used and has been effective in the past. And I put to you that people have been in much worse situations than we're in right now, but they've figured out the solution, they've worked together, and they've fixed things in the space of a few years. And if you do your own research, you'll find out that it has been done in the relatively recent past of human history. It can be done again. And I believe that through shows like this and through people like you guys listening to this, having these conversations with those around you, it can and will happen again. Lindsay, I'll give you a thought on that, then we'll move on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it can be done, and there are lots and lots of solutions, but it's going to be a slow process, because just like you've just said a minute ago, how many students are being taught about Magna Carta in schools? How many students are being taught about the Constitution or anything that may be of benefit to them? And you have this whole saying about, how do you know who you are unless you can trace your history and know where you came from? And it's exactly the same. They're trying to destroy our history and make, we're nothing special. We're just, or if anything, we're terrible. We're these terrible white oppressors, that sort of nonsense. And of course, that's how our kids think of themselves. We've got to try and get our young people educated, even if we have to do it ourselves at home. And probably it's your generation. I mean, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I would think that you're in the childbearing age. So it's people of your generation who have to have a program in their mind. Obviously, we can't trust the government with education. We're going to have to teach these certain basic things to our kids, such as contracting. Don't ever sign anything without reading the contract and knowing what you're getting into. Just basic stuff like that. Know where your rights came from. All these things. But I think that's, I don't know any other way around it. We've got to try and combat this propaganda from the state. And that's the only way I can think of it.
Well, that's the thing, Lindsay. They control the minds. They've got access to kids with 12 to 13 years of state-based so-called education, and they control the media. And I know a lot of people still believe that the media and government are separate. What you have to understand is the people who control your government also control your media, okay? There's people above the government and the media, and they're your enemies, and they see you as their enemies. And in past episodes, we've read out quotes from some of these people stating explicitly what they think of you. They honestly think you are their cattle. You have to understand this. And it all ties in together, Lindsay. Like we mentioned at the start of the show, how 70 years after the supposed end of World War II, they're still demonizing the Hitler administration. Why do you think that is? Well, maybe because Hitler, whether you like him or you don't like him, whether you believe Hollywood history or you don't, whether you believe the history of the victors or you don't, no one disputes the fact that he took that country, which was a rabble, and turned it around very quickly. And how did he do that? Well, a number of policies, including changing the way that money was used. Instead of being used for private banking interests, it was used for the people. Now, if people were aware of that, maybe they'd start to think about these things. Maybe they'd start to consider, is there a better way for us today? Well, so what do? Well, you plant all of these seeds in people's heads that everything that man did was evil, everything that he did that was wrong. Anyone who says a single positive thing about him must be an evil white supremacist who wants to kill innocent people. And that might sound crazy, but ask yourself, what have you been taught and constantly reinforced over your life? To the point where every week there's still something in the media talking about how evil Hitler was. Constantly. Why? Well, maybe because, and I can't tell you this is the case, you've got to do your own research, maybe because he did have a way to fix up his country and the problems it faced it, and one of them had to do with changing the monetary policy. So what I'm saying to you, Kerry, and what I'm saying to anyone who's listening to this is, think about the possibility that if there are solutions to our problem, you've been trained to not even look at them, and you've been trained to hate anyone who brings these things up, because that's exactly what I think's happened, Lindsay. We need to press on to the second topic for International today, and that's to do with skewed reporting of fatal shootings in the United States. Take it away.
Okay, thank you for that. And when I get to the end of this, I'll mesh that last topic in with this as well, what you were saying about Hitler, because it comes into this as well. This was in the Courier Mail on page 19 on the 22nd of June. And it said, 10 shot in fatal block party rage. Quote, Detroit, 10 people were shot, one fatally, when a gun was fired at a block party on a basketball court in Detroit on Saturday night. Police had not released the identity of the person killed in the shooting, but at least 3 of the victims were women. One man was critical and 2 others were in a serious condition last night. Police said the reason for the shooting was unknown. One person was detained for questioning, but no suspects are in custody. And that's the end of the quote. Now, I'll make a few comments and then we'll go back into discussion. There are a number of reasons that I raise this case. Firstly, the kill to wounded ratio. Now, I talked about this last week because Wendy Skur had brought it up with me. And here you have 1 dead to 9 injured. And I want you to remember that sort of ratio. This is fairly normal for a random shooting. Secondly, the race of the victims is not mentioned, and the race of the suspected perpetrator is not mentioned. The name of the person in custody is not mentioned, nor is the race of that person mentioned. No one has been named as the killer before a trial or evidence has been produced. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have not mentioned the need for firearm reform as a result of this shooting. No one has called it a race crime. No one has bothered to search for any websites or blogs relating to the person held in custody. It appears that there were no drills being carried out in the area at the time. No one has called for the removal of flags or colours of the basketball team, for the basketball courts, or where the shooting took place, for the district or the city or the state where the shooting occurred. Nobody wants to get rid of their flags or their colours or anything like that. There have been no reports of government payments being given to the families of the victims. We are told that the TPP was passed while the Charleston shooting publicity dominated the news headlines. Now, we were talking about that before, and that's where it came in. I have no mention of any political maneuver covered by this shooting in Detroit. So nobody was talking about it covering up anything. Lastly, this case bears nearly no resemblance whatsoever to the Port Arthur massacre, whereas the Charleston massacre bears every resemblance to the Port Arthur massacre. From the calls for bans on firearms, to a lone nut, to a drug influence, to being named as the killer with photographs before a trial, to drills being carried out at the time of the shooting, the only person I've not been able to tie in at the moment is Rebecca Peters, who was up to her armpits in what went on in Tasmania and the gun laws that resulted from it. Now, can I just mention that the aside that I was making there was that this whole business has tied in with the flag, and they're talking about doing away with the Southern flag from when they had the I don't know what you'd call it. They talk about a revolution or whatever, but I don't think it was. I think it was just a war between the states. So you had the North and the South, and I think the Southern flag is now being torn down. They're not going to put it on Southern buildings, and it's being considered to be racist and all that sort of thing. So, and it just, when you mentioned Hitler, it just reminded me of the same thing. The whole of North America was so rich because they didn't have usury that they had to be stopped, because it was becoming an example for the rest of Europe. And the bankers were going to lose control of Europe if they didn't put a stop to it. So they did an awful lot of work, including this war between the states, which they fostered, to put a stop to that so they could bring in their banking and usury. And I think you need to keep that in mind. So it wasn't just Hitler. It had happened before. It's happened in a number of occasions. They can't afford it. And I alluded to it before about Bjelke Petersen. They can't afford to have banks that are not under their control, because it sets an example. People will start to prosper, and it sets an example, and they'll have a revolution on their hands. So anyway, I've said all this stuff in here. I'll see what you've got to say, when perhaps we can discuss what I was alluding at here.
Well, there's a few things to touch on there. Firstly, for those who are listening for the first time, you mentioned Wendy Skerr. She was, of course, one of the first responders at the Port Arthur massacre event in Tasmania some 20 years ago now. And we had the pleasure of discussing what happened that day with her probably 2 months ago now, Lindsay. The time has gone quickly. And,
it has. Yeah.
I've been working slowly but surely on the stuff that I want to release based on that. I know that Ethan has as well. So hopefully in the coming weeks and months, we can release some of the work that we've been doing pertaining to that. But she got in touch with you, Lindsay, because she felt there were similarities to this Charleston shooting event. Now, on last week's show, we did discuss the fact that whether or not you think the event was fake, because obviously a lot of people have looked at this and have gone, this looks just as fake as so many of these other media events, these other media hoaxes that are being pushed on the people to get certain legislation or social changes passed. We said, even if you want to believe that this event was real, look at how it's being reported and look how that meshes with the actual statistics that we have on our hands. And then you look at this article that you've read out today, Lindsay, and it's a shooting. And again, let's just take it on face value. I haven't even looked into this one. I don't know if it's real or not, but let's just say that it's real. They're not reporting the color of the skin of the victims or the perpetrators. Why? Because they don't want to mention the fact that blacks are the people who are most responsible for killing other blacks, just like whites are the people who are most responsible for killing other whites. It's when a white kills a black that all of a sudden the race of the perpetrator and the victim becomes important. And Lindsay, we need to move on because time is of the essence. Any final thoughts on this one? We can discuss it more in the after show.
Yeah. No, I'm quite happy to wait until afterwards. Thanks for that.
All right, well, the third and final topic, at least on the agenda for the international segment, Lindsay, is to do with white privilege. Now, earlier in the week, I was perusing a Fairfax site to see what is being passed off as news, and I happened upon an article that took my interest. I'll just get you to chuck yourself on mute there, Lindsay. This is going to be a long one, so I'll read this out, then we'll have a discussion. Now, bear in mind that here in Australia, we have only two major newspaper publishers, Murdoch's News Corp, which controls about 2/3 of the market, and Fairfax, which controls most of the rest. So we've got something between a monopoly and a duopoly here. This is an article from Fairfax entitled, "Comedian Jesse Kahnweiler Tries to Get Arrested to Prove a Point About White Privilege," 24 June 2015. Quote, "LA-based comedian Jesse Kahnweiler's one black friend told her that because she's technically white, despite having darkish skin and chin hair and Jewish parents, she gets a whole lot of privileges and she gets treated totally different by the cops than black people get treated. So she decided to go out and test a theory. She asked the police officer if he thinks white privilege exists. I don't understand your question. White privilege? So, okay, good start. Here's one piece of advice to the residents of LA to foster peace between citizens and police. Just abide by the law. Simple as that, folks. Kahnweiler decided to do the opposite, though, just to see if he was right about the police being race blind. The results are hilarious. Spoiler, she doesn't get arrested, even after trying to sell a police officer her antidepressants. But also sobering when you remember the reason she's making this video in the first place is because young black Americans are losing their lives," end quote. Now, similar articles appeared in the Huffington Post in the United States and other outlets around the world. Again, this one was from Fairfax here in Australia. Now, I personally like the idea of being allowed to openly talk about the privileges of distinct racial and ethnic groups, so let's do just that. First, I'll remind the listeners of some of the facts I laid out back on episode 27 of the ARP. In America, the big six media groups control almost all of the mainstream media, including films. Listed in order of revenue and including some of their respective major holdings, here are those six. Number one, Comcast, 2013 revenue, $65 billion. They control NBC, CNBC, MSNBC, Universal Studios. Number two, Disney, 2014 revenue, $49 billion. They control ABC, ESPN, History Channel, Miramax Pictures, Touchstone Pictures, among others. I'm just listing some of them. At number three, News Corp, 2012 revenue, $33 billion. They control Fox, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, National Geographic, book publisher HarperCollins. They even control the National Rugby League in Australia to an extent, and of course, 20th Century Fox. Number four, Time Warner, 2013 revenue, $29 billion. CNN, Cartoon Network, Time Inc., which includes People, Sports Illustrated, and of course, the entire Warner Brothers outfit. Number five, CBS, 2013 revenue, $15 billion. CBS, Showtime Network, Simon & Schuster Publishing. Number six, Viacom, 2013 revenue, $14 billion. MTV, VH1, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, Paramount Pictures. Now, here's where it gets interesting. CBS and Viacom are both controlled by Sumner Redstone, who was born Rothstein, who is, of course, Jewish. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with being Jewish, but when you look into the other magnates involved in the big six, you quickly see a pattern. Comcast at number one, chairman and CEO Brian L. Roberts is Jewish. The executive VP, David L. Cohen, is Jewish. Number two, Disney. The chairman and CEO is a guy called Bob Iger. He's Jewish. At number four, Time Warner, chairman and CEO is Jeff Bewkes. He's non-Jewish, but he has had a Jewish wife in the past. Number five and six, Viacom and CBS, both have as their executive chairman Sumner Redstone, who's Jewish. And on top of this, Viacom's CEO and chairman is Philippe Dorman, who's Jewish. And the CBS chairman is Leslie Moonves, who is also Jewish, as is the president of their entertainment, Nina Tassler. So five of the big six media companies in the United States are overtly controlled by Jews, while the third largest of the group, News Corp, controlled by Uncle Rupert, who's not officially listed as being Jewish, well, his mother, Elizabeth Green, has been cited as Jewish, and in any event, regardless of whether Uncle Rupert's Jewish or not, he's probably the biggest Zionist of the whole lot. And so it's clear that although the Jews make up less than 1.5% of the US population, they control the US media. And don't take my word for it. This is from an article in the LA Times back in 2008, penned by a Jewish man named Joel Stein. Quote, actually, I'll tell you the name of the article. This is from the LA Times. Who runs Hollywood? Come on. December 19, 2008. Quote, I have never been so upset by a poll in all my life. Only 22% of Americans now believe that the movie and television industries are pretty much run by Jews, down from nearly 50% in 1964. The Anti-Defamation League, which released the poll results last month, sees in these numbers a victory against stereotyping. Actually, it just shows how dumb America has gotten. Jews totally run Hollywood, end quote. And again, I'll repeat, this is from the LA Times, an article written by a Jew back in 2008. On with the article, quote, how deeply Jewish is Hollywood? When the studio chiefs took out a full-page ad in the LA Times a few weeks ago to demand that the Screen Actors Guild settle its contract, the open letter was signed by News Corp, President Peter Chernin, Jewish, Paramount Pictures Chairman Brad Gray, Jewish, Walt Disney Co-Chief Executive Bob Iger, Jewish, Sony Pictures Chairman Michael Lindzen, surprise, Dutch Jew, Warner Brothers Chairman Barry Meyer, Jewish, CBS Corp Chief Executive Leslie Moonves, so Jewish his great uncle was the first Prime Minister of Israel, MGM Chairman Harry Sloan, Jewish, and NBC Universal Chief Executive Jeff Zucker, mega Jewish. If either of the Weinstein brothers had signed, this group would have not only the power to shut down all film production, but to form a minyan with enough Fiji water on hand to fill a mikvah. The Jews are so dominant, I had to scour the trades to come up with 6 Gentiles in high positions at entertainment companies. When I called them to talk about their incredible advancement, 5 of them refused to talk to me, apparently out of fear of insulting Jews. The 6th, AMC President Charlie Collier, turned out to be Jewish, end quote. Again, that's an article from the LA Times, a mainstream outlet written by a Jewish man in 2008. Now, it couldn't be any more clear that the US media is run by Jews. And yet, look what happens when a non-Jew points this out. I mean, imagine what would happen to me if this podcast of ours got too big. I mean, they'd come for me, wouldn't they? A Jewish man, Joel Stein's allowed to talk about it, but I'm probably not. But anyway, we'll press on. This isn't all. The US Federal Reserve, which was established in 1913, the same year as the Income Tax Collecting Revenue Act, is currently chaired by a lady named Janet Yellen. She's Jewish. She took over from Ben Shalom Bernanke in 2014. Ben Bernanke is also Jewish. Bernanke took over from Alan Greenspan in 2006. Alan Greenspan is also Jewish, and he took over as the Federal Reserve Chairman in 1987. So for the past 28 years, my entire adult life, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve has been Jewish. So I'm not saying that the Jews run the banks. I'm saying that certain Jews run the bank, the Federal Reserve of America. They've had it for 28 years now as chairman. A little bit closer to home here in Australia, let's take a look at the wealthiest families in Australia. This is from a Fairfax article published July 2013. Fairfax article entitled Family Fortunes Holding Firm, July 24, 2013. Quote, Australia's wealthiest families are continuing to hold their own in the face of a chaotic global economy, with the Smorgon clan once again claiming the title as the most prosperous, according to a new list compiled by BRW magazine. And here's a list. BRW Rich Families Top 5. Number 1, Smorgon Family, $2.6 billion. Number 2, the Beeson Family, $2.1 billion. Number 3, the Lieberman Family, $2.1 billion. Number 4, the Meyer Family, $2 billion. And what do these four families, the four wealthiest in Australia, according to the Australian Financial Review, all have in common? They're all Jewish. This despite the Jewish population of Australia comprising roughly 100,000 people, according to census figures, or less than 0.5 of 1% of the national population. Now, remember that I began this segment by talking about an American comedian perpetuating the cultural Marxist and overtly racist myth of white privilege. The amazing thing is that this character, Miss Jessie Kahnweiler, is in fact herself Jewish. So we have a Jewish person pretending to be white so she can perpetuate the myth of white privilege, when in fact the Jews, who make up only a tiny proportion of the population in the US, controlled by their own admission the mainstream media, and have been in charge of the Federal Reserve for longer than I've even been alive. Then, here in my own country, one of the two newspaper outlets which publish absurd nonsense about white privilege, despite the fact that the four wealthiest families in this country, by admission of the very same publisher, Fairfax, are Jewish. Now, imagine for a moment that it was actually white people who control the media and banking in America. They don't, but just imagine they did. And imagine that a white person pretended to be black so they could wax lyrical about black privilege. And imagine that because they had been so dumbed down by mass education and mainstream media propaganda that upon hearing a white person pretend to be black and speak about black privilege, imagine that the black people actually went along with it and felt shame about the privilege they were supposedly benefiting from. It sounds utterly ridiculous, doesn't it? That's because it is ridiculous, and it's high time that white people stopped allowing the Jewish-controlled media to propagate anti-white nonsense like that in the article which prompted this segment. I, for one, am quite happy to have a conversation about who is privileged in this society. In fact, I would suggest that we need such a conversation as soon as possible, not only here, but in the US and many other places around the world. And yet, if I were to make too many noises about any of this, I could end up like the Perth man Brendan O'Connell, behind bars, terrorized by police both inside and outside of prison, and labeled a racist for pointing out some basic undeniable truths. That is my privilege as a white man in a Zionist-occupied territory today, which is exactly what this country is. The myth of white privilege is racist, anti-white propaganda, and if we are going to talk about ethnic, racial privilege in our society, I welcome it. But let's stick to the facts and be honest about who is actually privileged. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And I think it was really good that you brought all that up again. A lot of it you've done before, and I think it's good to renew it because it makes it easy for people to track down, because people will use that as a reference in their conversations and whatever. I think it's really good that you've done that. So thank you for that. Yeah, and then talking about the man in Western Australia, I'd heard that he had gone back to jail again. Now, I don't know. I can't get any other information about that, but that almost sounds like it's just a vendetta now. It's a bit of a worry to me. But no, I agree with exactly what you've just said is true. And I think we ought to have an open debate about it, an open debate about privilege in Australia. It's not just those families. There are a whole range of other people in positions of authority in Australia who are Jewish, and they could almost be described as the movers and shakers of Australia. And when you bring out the point that, you know, they're less than 1%, it really is a national disgrace. We really should be doing something about it and bringing it back into line again. So I agree with you. I welcome a debate about this. I welcome the people in the chat to give their opinions, and I'd like a bit of feedback on it as well. So we can start
Lindsay, we're up to, sorry to interrupt you there, mate. We're up to over 60 people watching live. In the live chat, there's plenty of conversation. Lord Rollo, a loyal listener, says that listening to all of this, he wishes he was Jewish. And I should make the point that you have to admire the Jews for the amount of power they've managed to gather. And you also have to admire them for using their media to convince white people that white people are the problem in a country that was settled and in many ways built up to be what it is by the white British and the white Irish settlers. I mean, what they've managed to do is truly remarkable. And I'm not sitting here pointing all of this out saying, let's take it away from them. All I'm saying is if we're going to talk about privilege and if they're going to peddle this nonsense in the media that there's this thing called white privilege, and by the way, they teach this at schools and universities as well. This is what social justice warriors are all about, white privilege. If they're going to tell me that I somehow have all of this privilege because of the color of my skin, if they're allowed to teach white people at school to feel guilty or shameful for the color of their skin, which they do in Australia, which they do in the United States, make no mistake about it. If they're allowed to do that, if we're allowed to say that one particular group, in this case white people, we should talk about the privilege they have, okay, let's have that discussion if that's what you want to do. All I'm going to ask is that we stick to the facts, and the facts are that the media is, by their own admission, controlled by Jews. The financial system with the Federal Reserve at the heart is controlled by Jews. If we're going to talk about privilege, let's have an honest and frank discussion about it. And why is it that if you took this podcast, the full 2 hours of it, and played it to the average person in Australia, forced them to sit down and listen, why is it that they would continue to wince and to feel upset and get angry at me just for pointing out the facts? How come if I point out the facts, I'm the bad guy? But in the meantime, we've got our mainstream press, outlets like Fairfax, openly stating that white people should feel ashamed of their white skin. I mean, if people can't see how incredibly messed up this is, there's not much I can do for them, Lindsay.
No, I agree. And some people in the chat are just saying, well, you can't blame them. They just work together. And to some degree, I don't agree with that entirely, but I do agree they work together. And I think we should be working together. But that's one of the cleverness of what they've done, is that they've destroyed our cohesion. And I think that's the clever part of what they do. I don't think it's very ethical, but that's what they do. And I think it's really up to us to start and get a bit smarter and just realise how things are done in this world and start to look after each other as a group and have some cohesion within our group.
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it, Lindsay? I mean, we're at the stage right now where if suppose I were to want to start an organisation just for black people to get together to share their experiences of life and to help one another, that'd be no problem. In fact, I'd probably get a government grant for it, just as if I was to do that for a Chinese group or for any other ethnicity. But if I were to even suggest it for a white group, I would be demonized as a white supremacist. And the media and the people who run the show, they've been very clever at making white people truly believe that to even think that we should work together as white people, that makes us the equivalent of people who want to kill 6 million. I mean, they've been very clever in doing that. And I think, again, I keep my finger on the pulse on social media and other platforms. I'm seeing more and more young people especially realize, hold on a second, the privilege, how am I privileged? It's going to take me a third of my life paying massive interest on a house just to own a house. It's hard enough with a job. It takes me an hour to get to work one way, an hour and a half back in peak hour. How am I privileged? I'm just trying to live my life. What did I do to deserve the mainstream media saying that I'm the privileged one? And this is people who aren't even aware just how privileged certain Jewish people are in this country. Can you imagine what would happen if and when there's a mass awakening to who the real privileged ones are, Lindsay?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that's part of our job. And not just us, not just you and me and Ethan, but the people listening to this as well. We've got to start and form some cohesion. As individuals, we might have to be the centre of a circle of people who we start to get this message out, so it starts expanding outwards, so that the more and more of our people understand what's got to be done, understand the situation as it stands, and not the propaganda, and we start doing something about it. It's got to come fairly soon, or we'll be too far down. It's going to be awfully difficult for our grandkids to get out of. So it behoves us to do it. So I think it's wonderful what you've just put through, and I hope other people appreciate what the amount of research you've done there. So I thank you for that.
Well, no worries, mate. In the live chat, Gary Macker in Tannister, another loyal listener, says that he doesn't feel too much white privilege when he's out on the road working his ass off 6 nights a week. And that's the thing. I mean, I grew up in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, where a lot of the lower to lower middle income people go out to buy their first house. You sort of have to go onto the fringes of the city to be able to afford your first home for a lot of people who don't come from, well-to-do white collar families. And so I grew up in an area that was, for most of my formative years, from say age 10 to 16, it was predominantly white. What's interesting is now that area is many parts of it are now predominantly immigrants. They're predominantly islanders, Samoas and Tongans and these people. And there aren't many places now where you can find predominantly white people in Australia. And it's funny, I mean, we don't have time to talk about it too much today, Lindsay, but I read just recently in the United States, if you take all the kids under the age of 5 in the United States today, white people are now a minority. It's what they call majority minority. So even the United States, which again was settled by the British and the Germans and largely built by white Europeans, even in that country today, the whites are becoming the minority. And this is promoted as a good thing. I mean, can you imagine if we flooded Africa with white people? Could you imagine people celebrating about the blacks becoming a minority in Africa? It's ridiculous. Could you imagine flooding Asia with white people and celebrating the Asians becoming a minority? No way. But for some reason, when it happens in a place like the United States or Australia or any of the white countries that are having mass immigration foisted upon them, somehow we're meant to celebrate that. And people can't work out what's going on here. I mean, and here's the thing. I don't blame people for not being able to work out what's going on, because they've been so indoctrinated by school and by the mainstream media. And I think by using outlets like the internet, over time, people are going to start to realize what's really going on. And it fills me with a lot of hope. And I hope that our listeners, when they hear me speaking about this, I lay out the facts. I lay out what I think is the facts. I want you to go and do your own research. If and when you realize that everything I just said is correct, I hope then you realize, well, you've got work that you have to do now to spread that information. Because right now, that's what it's all about. Information. We are in an information war. And unfortunately, our enemies get access to young people from the time they can go to school. And I apologize for that. That's Lindsay just going to grab his mobile phone. So I'll address this one to the audience rather than to Lindsay there. What I'm saying is, if you realize that everything I just said is true, it's up to you to do your own research and find out if what I'm saying is true. But if it is, then it's up to you to spread that information. Now, in this country, Australia, for talking about the things I've just talked about, I am taking somewhat of a risk. There are people who do go to prison for some of the things, for talking about some of the things that I talk about. Now, I don't think that anything's going to happen to me. I would hope that it wouldn't. But the point of the matter is that if they were to go down that path of trying to prosecute people like me, they could only prosecute so many of us. If everyone was talking about this, they couldn't throw us all in prison. So it is incumbent on you, if what I'm talking about is true, to start speaking up against it. Lindsay, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I had to, because of my mother going to hospital, I had to leave my phone on. So that's all it was. Thanks for that.
No, that's all right, mate. Well, I'll tell you what, we try and keep these shows to 2 hours. And I know that we promised to talk about the TPP. We will do that in the after show. And what we'll do is we'll upload the full show with the after show to our website, ausroundtable.com, so people can get access to the official show and to the after show. We won't get time to talk about the TPP today. So, Lindsay, we'll spend the last few minutes before our final thoughts just discussing this a little bit further. I've just laid out how I believe that it's Jewish people who control the US media. They admit to it. That it's Jewish people who control the US Federal Reserve. The 4 wealthiest families in Australia are all Jewish. I want to make this point very clear. I don't begrudge any of them any of that. Good on them for working together to help one another to get these positions of power. You have to admire that they do that. It's time that white people started to realize that they're keeping you from doing the same. And there's a reason for that, Lindsay. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand exactly. And this is what we've always talked about. The whole concept of an economy is that it's free and open to everybody. Capitalism, or whatever, however you like to describe it. It's just healthy competition. But it's not. When you've got one group working to exclude everybody else, and we're not doing the same, of course we're going to finish up with the rough edge of the pineapple. That's just the way it is. So we've got to change the whole ground rules and start looking after ourselves. And I think that's just the basis of it. And not feeling guilty about looking after ourselves. That's the best part of it. They've convinced us, like you've just said before, they've convinced us that looking after ourselves is wrong. No, it's not. No. we've got to come to terms with that and start jamming that into our kids as well, so they understand. It's about time we started looking after our own people. Okay, that's it.
And that's the point. That's the point, Lindsay, is that right now Europe is being flooded against their will with mass immigration. In fact, all white countries and only white countries are being flooded with mass immigration that they did not vote for. And we've talked about this before on the Oz Roundtable, how the fact that Pauline Hanson had lots of support behind her. She had too much support, so she was a political prisoner. They imprisoned her on trumped-up charges by a fund that was set up by News Corp, old mate Uncle Rupert's company, and our then Federal Health Minister, Tony Abbott. And how many people know about this? I mean, I get people telling me all the time that they believe that women are mistreated in politics and they're all about, equality for women in politics. And I say, great, how do you feel about Pauline Hanson? Oh, she's the devil. She's the worst. I mean, they've been indoctrinated to not have the most basic understanding of what's happening in this country. So I'm very patient with people. I understand if you've been indoctrinated for years and years to be a self-hating white, to hate anybody who stands up for white rights, to hate people of the past who stood up for white rights. If you've been trained that way from the day that you were born, basically, of course it's going to take you a little while to deprogram yourself, but you can do it. I know that for a fact because I've done it. I've seen other people doing it, and people are doing it all the time. And hopefully a show like this, again, everything that I talk about, the links will be there on ozroundtable.com. Hopefully this can be one of many places that people can go on the internet to discuss these things, to learn about these things, and to realize it doesn't make you a bad person to want to stand up for people of your own skin color. If you are a black person, you should be proud of your heritage. You should stand up for it. And if you're an Asian person, you should be proud of whatever your heritage is, and you should stand up for it as well. Exact same with white people. Don't let other people tell you to be ashamed of the color of your skin. Don't let them tell you about all the evil things that your forefathers and that the people before you supposedly did. Be proud of who you are and stand up for the rights of the people like you who are coming after you. There's another whole generation of white people who are about to be born, and they deserve to have a place where they can be safe. And as we've seen in places like South Africa, when the whites are the minority and they don't have political power, they're not treated particularly well. And the way that we're going, if the white people in Europe and in the countries like Australia that were settled by Europe, if they don't start standing up for their own rights, it'll be the children to come who will be the ones to suffer the most. And it's incumbent on us as the people alive today to do everything we can to make sure that there is a safe place for white people in the future. And I'm more than proud to say that that's part of what I want to do with this show and with all the work that I do, not just online, but out on the ground. I believe that white people have a right to exist, and the way that we're going, we won't unless we start to stand up for ourselves, just like I think all groups should stand up for themselves. And hey, maybe we should look to the Jews for guidance. They seem to know how to do it. They seem to know how to work together. We should admire what they've done as a group, and we should try to emulate it. Being proud of their own heritage, sticking together and working as a group. Maybe we should take a leaf out of their book. We've got to move on to our final thoughts now, Lindsay. For the official show, again, we'll talk about plenty of other things in the after show, but we keep the official show to 2 hours. So for episode 38, Lindsay, it's just been you and me. I've really enjoyed it. We'll get Ethan back next week, but on the 28th of June, episode 38, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just one thought on the topic you've just done is that when you're talking about the younger generations, it just worries me when you see Germany and Russia and, well, even our birth rates are getting so low that they're almost beyond redemption. And unless we do something very smartly, there will be no kids in the future. It'll gradually get worse and worse. We really have to start and turn it around and start breeding for the benefit of our grandkids and great grandkids. So yeah, it is getting to crunch time. So people really need to consider this very seriously. And that comes, brings it back to feminism and a whole range of other topics. It's almost like the octopus. They've been very, very clever and so many different arms to destroy us. And we really have to start pulling us all together and looking after ourselves. So I think that's it. And in some ways, this has been a good broadcast because we've brought these topics to the fore. And I'm quite happy with the way it's gone. So thanks for that.
Oh, no worries, mate. Well, I didn't actually write down my final thoughts for today, but there was one thing in particular I did want to say, and that is that there are other shows out there that talk about the truth. I mean, a lot of our listener base, they found us through what they call the hoax busting community on YouTube, people who look at media events, break them down, because so many events in the media today aren't just fake, they're provably fake, they're obviously fake. And a lot of people found our show through that group. What you have to understand is they're not the only group online who are talking about important issues. There's one show online that I listen to every week. I strongly recommend it. It's from Renegade Broadcasting Online. It's hosted by a guy called Kyle Hunt. He's the guy who made the documentary called Hellstorm. He does a weekly show. I strongly recommend it. And on their most recent episode, they were talking about the Charleston shooting event. They were talking about some of the problems of the media narrative surrounding it. And they were talking about the truth. And I think there's a lot of people, they know that there's this corner of YouTube that talk about these things, and they think that that's it. What you have to understand is there's entire other areas out there online who discuss these things, oftentimes better than we can. And I strongly recommend you try and widen your horizon, listen to more people, listen to more shows. You'll find lots more people talking about the truth, and maybe in a way that resonates with you better, and maybe in a way that you can share better. So on our website, AusRoundtable.com, there'll be links to all of the information that we've talked about today, and there'll be a link to Kyle Hunt's Renegade Broadcasting. It's called Solar Storm. In the most recent episode, which they recorded Monday, so what was that, on the 22nd, I think, I'll provide a link to that. It's a 2.5-hour show. They had as their guests these guys called the Kraz Files. They're Australians. I've been meaning to get in touch with them to see if we can collaborate, but they had some Aussies on the show. So in particular, if you're an Australian listener to this show, I strongly recommend you go and listen to Solar Storm. But even if you're an American listener, Kyle Hunt himself is down there, I think, in Florida. So please, guys, I never ask for money when we do this show. We get people offering money, and I appreciate that, but we've never asked for it. I don't have a PayPal donation button on the site. I don't do this for money. I don't do this for accolades or for praise. What I am hoping to do is get some information out there. And all I would ask of you for the time that I put into this show, if you want to repay me, you don't have to, but if you want to repay me anyway, go and click on the link to Kyle's show, download it, listen to it, see what you think of it, come to your own conclusions, and give feedback. Give feedback to him and give feedback to us, which leads me to my next final thought, which is that we've got a comments section on our website. We've been getting lots of comments. I appreciate it. You can contact us at australianroundtable@gmail.com, and you can leave comments underneath our official upload on YouTube. So there's many ways to get in touch with us, and we appreciate all of the feedback. I know many of you have taken the time to get in touch with us lately. We've almost been inundated, so we haven't got back to all of you straight away, but I promise we're working on it. And I want to say how much I appreciate each and every one of you for listening to the show as you do, for spreading the word when you do, and for taking the time to get in contact with us, because we do this for you guys. I enjoy the show. Lindsay enjoys the show. He always tells me how much he enjoys it. I can see the smile on Ethan's face when he walks in the door, when he's here. We all love doing the show, and we know that a lot of you love the show as well. So thank you for all of your support. It's time to wrap it up for the official upload on the 28th of June, 2015, episode 38. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.